Welcome everyone to City Council work session. Welcome to everyone at home and here. So we have a couple items on the agenda, but first up, you were made aware of a motion that Councilor Brown wants to put forward. Councilor Brown?
Thank you, Mayor. I move to extend until January 13th, 2015 at 5 p.m. the time for submission of proposed business plans for the operation, maintenance, and repair of Civic Stadium, and for interested parties to raise the $3 million that would be used for rehabilitating Civic Stadium. And I'll speak to it briefly. Get a second?
Moved and seconded.
Thank you. This aligns more closely with the February 16th date, which is the date that the city and 4J hit upon for the council to make its final decision whether to proceed with the purchase. And so it also gives proposers, it gives the people that are actually trying to raise the $3 million almost the full amount of time. I'd rather see that date be February 16th for the $3 million to be raised. I don't think I'm in the majority on that one. I would be willing to propose my own amendment and make the date of December 1st. I kind of agree with the attorney and staff's idea about that, but I would want the $3 million. But by the same token, I'd like to switch the $3 million to February 16th or 15th, because we deliberate on the 16th whether to instruct the manager to go ahead with the proposal or not. So to my mind, there's no difference. We are kind of putting the cart before the horse by asking for business plans before we have site control anyway. So I know of only one party, and actually they were here a few months ago getting ready to present their plan, and then council direction took a different turn, and so they weren't able to present their plan. That's the United Stadium Group. I know of one other group that is interested, but I haven't spoken to them recently. So, you know, instead of doing an RFP for operations after we gain site control, we're putting all these decisions in advance. And basically so we're missing out on a lot of good proposals because very few people know about this, just the local people. I'm sure there's people in Portland that aren't even aware of this, much less the rest of the United States. Management of sporting facilities there are nationwide companies that do this. And by doing it this way, we leave all those people out, and we may not get the best deal. But if that's the will of the majority of council to proceed this way, that's fine. It's a way to proceed. But to a proposer, there's uncertainty. Well, gee, are they going to raise the $3 million or not? So it doesn't really matter if that uncertainty is on December 1st or February 16th, as far as raising the $3 million. They're still going to they're going to submit plans not knowing whether the city's going to actually acquire the property or not.
I've got, I wanted to ask the city manager if he wanted some clarifications at this point, and then I've got Mike and George and Claire in the queue.
I appreciate George's potential amendment. My concern was just enough time to evaluate the business plan portion of it. How you choose to do the $3 million is not as important from a timing perspective for us, but it is. We would want to have enough time to be able to evaluate proposals. Depending on the extent of the proposal, we may want to bring somebody else in that has more expertise than we do in that, and so we just need time to do that.
Anything else that you need to add to that, Glenn, or anything? Okay. So the only other comment I would make, and I'm pleased that what you've offered there, George, is that my understanding may be different than yours, because my understanding was that we wanted to know that somebody had $3 million to bring to the table before we even looked at a plan. That was the way that I heard the information. So that's why I see we're not even looking at something if people don't have those resources to bring to the table. I'm just saying that's my understanding. Mike?
Thank you, Mayor. And for me, it was at least $3 million, if not a great deal more. And I want to reiterate a part of that original motion because it often doesn't get restated in some of these conversations, that it would be a requirement of such a proposer to do a new estimate and appraisal of the property and what it would cost to get it to ADA and a market analysis of their business plan, their business plan with a market estimate of what it would cost to accomplish that. Secondly, I want to have at least 90 days, as I've made arrangements for a neutral third-party expert to analyze a business plan as well, and I'd want that extra input. And for me, as the mayor said, I wouldn't be interested in going to that trouble unless someone had the money up front that they were willing to spend on this, and we knew that going in. So did I understand you to amend the date or not?
I will amend it, yes, I will amend.
Did you do it
if my
just
second
now or-
will, well, no, I.
Okay, I was just
I'm waiting
asking
for you
yes
to
or no.
finish, no.
I'll
I'm waiting
move
for my
to
second.
amend then to December 1st for all of it. And if I have a second, I'll speak more to that.
For purposes of discussion, I'll second it.
I think that, as the mayor rightly points out, if someone doesn't have the resources to do the work that's required, it doesn't make sense to spend all the time and effort analyzing it, and that's something that they should come into at the beginning of it. I think it's important for us to have at least 90 days, so I don't want to put this back further. I just as soon decide it now, but I'm willing to go to the December 1st date. Thank you.
George?
Now, when you said for all of it, is that the money and business plan both?
Mhm.
Okay. All right, well, speaking to the overall discussion, I fail to see any correlation between the timeline that we originally set with moving it out to December 1st or January 13th or February, whatever it's going to be, because of the decision that finally the school made. This property's been up for sale for years, and nobody has made any effort whatsoever to come forward until just recently. We as the council have yet to officially hear from anybody that's interested in this. The only information that we're hearing is second and third hands of people that may be interested in coming up with money. We set a goalpost months ago for this project, and I think in order to be consistent and fair with everybody, because we don't know if there's somebody out there that was trying to put together a plan and said, well, we can't make it by the September deadline, and went a different direction completely. So, you know, we may be eliminating some people that had possibly looked at doing this. I doubt it. But I think that to be consistent in our actions, I think we need to remain with the original date.
Claire?
Just for some context, Glenn, can you remind us why Councilor Brown is making this motion in terms of the significance of the February date for our,
Now the December date, right?
well, no, there's a February date, and can you remind us the significance of that?
Sure. When the council first passed its motion, it provided people 6 months to come up with the money in the business plan, and then gave the city 3 months to evaluate, and so a total of 9 months. When 4J was working on the initial draft of the purchase and sale agreement, they had assumed that the 9 months actually would begin when the purchase and sale agreement roughly was going to be signed, which is how they came up with the mid-February date. And we just went with that date, because if the council wants to decide sooner, you certainly can, and it was just easier to agree to that date. So that's where the February 16th date came from.
Great. So if we were to approve this extension to December, either for the proposal and the money or just the proposal, how much longer are we giving folks to respond?
That would be adding about another 3 months. If you use the December 1st date, it's a little less because it was September 5th. But the December 1st date, as I said in my email, that 4 days makes a huge difference to us, because it means we can get something into your packet for a work session the following week.
Yeah, so at this point, I'm actually inclined to support Councilor Clark's amended motion to require both the proposal and the $3 million in hand or committed. I think that's fair. It's an extension, and my feeling is if folks don't have that $3 million by then, I don't know that another 6 weeks or however much longer that would have been to go through February is really going to make the difference. So that's where I sit right now.
Chris?
Thank you. Interesting point raised about goalposts. We've already moved the goalposts a few times in terms of both amount and time. So moving the goalpost yet one more time is probably not that big a deal for me. But the question is, how much more time do we need here? And I think to the mayor's and others' points, I'm not interested in a business plan if there's not going to be any money. What's the point in reading a business plan if there is no money? So I think having both the business plan and the money be tied to a similar date, I think does actually make sense. Having that date be far enough ahead that it gives us time to evaluate it also makes sense. So, but I don't feel inclined to feel that the September date is hard and fast because, heck, we've already moved it, and I don't want to be accused of, you know, putting the kibosh on this at the last possible moment. So I'm willing to go to December 1st. That's okay. But I'm really not inclined to just keep extending the goalposts time after time after time after time. So December 1st I'm willing to go to, but we need to fish or cut bait.
Alan?
I was going to suggest originally I thought December 5th is a Friday, which would allow us time to get the proposal and for the next in our next packet. So I'm wondering is that okay?
I just have to, there is a timing there for us to actually get information prepared and put it into the cycle. It really is difficult on the 5th to be able to get to into the next week. That's why the 1st makes sense to us.
Okay, that's Monday.
Yeah.
The other question that I have is, would you look at the language of the motion, Glenn? Because when I read this, it says, for interested parties to raise the $3 million as opposed to having it in hand. I want to be sure that whatever we're voting on, we know what we're voting on.
My intention when I drafted this for George was to basically take your prior motion that in essence gave people until September 5th and just bump that date out to December 5th or December 1st so that everything that was in your prior motion, including the things that Mike had talked about in terms of what goes into a business plan, is all incorporated into this language.
All right. Just want to be sure we were. Greg had his hand up. I didn't see Greg. Go ahead, Greg.
I'm not sure quite how to cast this, but I'd like to propose a friendly amendment to Mike's motion that this be the final extension, that December 1st is the final extension, and we will not entertain any further extensions of this as we move forward. Is that an appropriate amendment, or?
The council can certainly add that, and then if the council changes its mind,
Yeah.
you have the power to change your mind. So adding it is an expression of intent, but it in no way
Compels-
precludes the council
compels
from
us, yeah.
doing another one.
Yeah. All right, I'll leave it alone, Mike.
So you can't amend an amended motion, right? So
He's not doing anything.
you're not
I'd have
doing
to do a
anything?
separate motion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not
doing
Yeah. I'll leave it alone.
Okay, so now George and Mike in the queue on this amended motion. George?
Thank you, Mayor. Well, the goalposts have been moved several times, you're correct, and the most recent movement of the goalpost was when the city and 4J came to their final working agreement. And February 16th is the day that council will tell the city manager to either proceed with the sale to 4J or not to proceed. That is the day that we will know once and for all, has the $3 million been raised or has it not been raised? We will have at least one proposal in hand well before that date. I'm assuming well before the December 1st date. because it's already been written up. They may have to make a few adjustments to it. And I'm sure the other group that I know of for sure that's interested will have theirs in place too, certainly by December 1st. So there's absolutely no reason to tie that date with the $3 million necessary to be raised for the repairs. And by the way, a party now with 4J permission is going through the facility and doing a very close inspection. This is somebody that has wide experience with historic preservation and construction, and they are looking at it, and they are going to come up with some new parameters for how much it would take. And I will tell you that the first preliminary thing I heard from them so far is they were amazed at what great shape the structure itself is in. They were amazed by the beams. There's very little dry rot. So anyway, that's happening. If we use the February 16th date, that's 2 more months. What's 2 months in this long process to get to the $3 million? It's really nothing, and yet it could be critical for the Friends of Civic Stadium's escrow account. A grant writer has been retained, very credible, very experienced, widely known in the historic preservation community, has written grants for historic preservation and sports facilities. Those grants are on schedules. I'm sorry, I don't have all the information here. I didn't realize this would be that contentious. However, there's deadlines, for grants when they have to be submitted, when they make this final selection. So by extending that to February, say a day before, February 15th, is not a big deal. It gives every chance to making it go forward successfully. Whereas shaving off the 2 months makes no difference to the proposers, the people that are going to propose to operate the facility. It makes no difference because they don't know whether the city is going to get site control or not. It doesn't matter whether they know that on December 1st. They will definitely know it on February 16th. So I will not support this amendment.
Okay. Mike?
Thank you, Mayor. I just have to say that I admire my friend George's faith and hope and perseverance on this. It's inspiring. I don't have as much that will get there, but I admire his. Greg, I'm with you in spirit and heart on with Chris on the idea that this should absolutely be our final adjustment to this. But I don't want to tie our hands in the case of some emergency or some unforeseen opportunity. The other piece of this that I think it's helpful for the public that's watching us and as it gets reported to remember is that we started out with the manager telling us he thought it would be, based on the estimates he had, over $10 million to refurbish and to rebuild this. We initially settled on $5.5 million and then adjusted down to $3 million. But it has always, at least as I understand it, been the majority's will that whoever steps up needs to have all of the resources sufficient to rebuild and rehab that stadium, and that the city won't be putting money into that portion. So it isn't just the $3 million, it's whatever the estimate turns out to be in order to refurbish that. And I just wanted to make sure that that part gets well emphasized.
George?
Thank you. Yes, as far as the February 16th date, that wasn't a decision we made. Before Jay made that, perhaps there should have been some better communication as to our deadlines and their deadlines. That's neither here nor there. That's all in the past now. My concern is how many more last possible moments are there going to be in this deal? We keep extending, we keep extending, we keep extending. And even if Greg's idea was binding, I'm sure somebody would find a way to get around it. I personally don't have much confidence in this entire deal. I'm glad to see that some of the members of the council are privy to certain information. Perhaps if we all had the same information, we'd have a little more confidence in our votes on this and moving forward. But as it is now, again, second, third hand information and a lot of what ifs and maybes and who's who, and it just, to me, it does not feel right. The whole deal does not feel right at all.
I'd just like to say that the February 16th date was the date that was worked out by the city manager and 4J. That's his job, as, you know, he does the real estate transactions. Council approved that date. It's not a big surprise. We voted on it, we approved that by motion. So, as far as not being in the know on all this stuff, hey, we hold work parties at Civic Stadium all the time. They hold meetings all the time. Anyone's welcome to come, and they welcome anyone's help. So if someone wants more info, show up to some of the meetings, read the brochures, read the background information. And then that way you'll be in the know. So, thank you.
So we've got other business to get done today. So what I want to be sure before we vote is Mike's motion simply changes the date, correct? And so then again, given what I've heard, because the language here is the language you put forward with only he's only changing the date. The language here does not say that people don't have to have the $3 million on the December 1st.
It says
date.
It does.
Yeah, it does.
It says
Does.
this requires, this motion would require, all this motion does is it moves the September 5th date to December 1st.
Right.
So
I just want
everything-
to be sure there's no loop, because I'm hearing a variety of comments being made about when the date should be, that the money, and I just want to be sure what we're passing is what we think we're passing. That's
In
all.
hand.
Yes, unless the council does something different in the future, this would require people to have the money in hand by December 1st and
That's
to
what I
have, and
wanted.
to submit the business plan by December 1st.
That's what I want to make sure. All right, we're ready to vote. All those in favor of Mike's amendment, please indicate. 1, 2, 3, 4. All those in opposition? 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm in favor. All right. Now we don't vote it as amended?
Now you vote on it as amended.
All those in favor of the motion as amended? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. In opposition, 1. It passes. Thank you. Now we're on to the next item, which is the discussion on divestment.
Thanks, Mayor, and I'll just turn over to Twyla.
Good afternoon. So I'll have a brief presentation today before we open up the floor to discussion and further questions. So last January, I was here talking to you about fossil fuel divestment. As a member of the Mayor's Innovation Project, Mayor Piercy has pledged to work to divest the city's holding from fossil fuel companies within the next 5 years. At the end of that work session, you asked me to bring back a policy on fossil fuel divestment for further discussion. Since then, I've met with the Deferred Compensation Committee, the Investment Advisory Board, and talked with other jurisdictions. And today I will provide a brief overview of the policy and related actions developed as a result of those conversations. As a reminder, for purposes of investing city funds, the city pools all of our cash from operations in all funds to allow us to get economies of scale from our investment activity. We also follow the objectives listed in the red boxes in priority order from left to right. Safety always comes first, as we are stewards of public funds. Next, we want liquidity, or the ability to access cash when needed, so that we're never in a position to sell a security to meet payroll or pay a bill. And then finally, after we meet those two objectives, we look to achieving yield, or achieving a market rate of return on our investments. We also invest within the restrictions of state statutes, city code, and the city's investment policies. These restrictions limit investment choices only to the safest and most highly rated securities, such as U.S. Treasuries, government agency bonds, and the other categories shown in the blue boxes on the slide. As I mentioned last January, while under state statute we are not allowed to purchase stock in a corporation or have an equity holding, we are allowed to purchase corporate bonds and commercial paper of highly rated corporations. This is where a corporation borrows money and pledges to repay with interest, similar to when the city issues bonds for a major project. So the policy under your consideration today is in the form of a resolution, which is in your materials. This slide shows a summary of the actions that would occur should the resolution be adopted. The policy items under the City Council heading would be addressed through letters to the appropriate bodies influencing those decisions, along with a copy of the resolution upon its passage. The policy items under the city manager heading would be handled administratively by the city manager upon passage of the resolution. And so next, I'll give a brief overview of each area listed on the slide. So we'll start by looking at direct investments, as this area is the one where the city has the most control. While the city currently does not hold investments in fossil fuel companies, those investments are currently allowed under state statute and our investment policy. This informal practice of avoiding fossil fuel investments could be formalized by amending the investment policy to prohibit investment in fossil fuel companies. Should you decide to adopt the resolution, the city manager will amend the investment policy via an administrative order to prohibit direct investment in the top 200 fossil fuel companies as listed on the carbon tracker list. City investment funds are indirectly exposed through participation in the state local government investment pool, or LGIP. The Oregon Short-Term Fund has 2.4% of a $13.8 billion portfolio currently invested in fossil fuel companies. However, the LGIP offers safety, liquidity, yield, and diversification to the city, and it really is a key component of managing the city's overall portfolio. Although the state treasurer is currently choosing other avenues to influence fossil fuel companies in regards to this issue, the council could urge the Oregon Short-Term Fund Board and Oregon Investment Council to divest from fossil fuel companies over the next 5 years by sending the resolution, along with the cover letter, to the chair of the Oregon Short-Term Fund Board. Retirement funds are not city funds, but rather funds held in trust for beneficiaries, in this case, city employees and retirees. These funds are under the purview of the PERS Board that administers the system and the Oregon Investment Council, who is responsible for investing the funds of the system. Currently, a portion of those funds are exposed to fossil fuel investment through investments held by the state. While the city does not have control over the investment of these funds, the council could urge the PERS Board and Oregon Investment Council to divest from fossil fuel companies over the next 5 years by sending the resolution along with the cover letter to the chair of the PERS Board. The next area is deferred compensation. Deferred compensation funds are not city funds, but are funds held in trust for plan beneficiaries. The Deferred Compensation Committee, a committee made up of city employees, monitors and selects fund choices within the constraints of their fiduciary duty. Currently, the plan choices available have exposure to fossil fuel investments. The committee works with a professional plan consultant and other advisors on fund choices and related topics. Should you adopt this divestment policy, the city manager will direct the Deferred Compensation Committee to work with a plan consultant to analyze the possibility of fossil fuel divestment in relation to deferred compensation funds, and, if applicable, to develop a policy guiding fossil fuel-free investment criteria for the fund. And the final topic area today is state legislation. While there has not been legislation introduced in the state of Oregon requiring divestment of statewide retirement funds from fossil fuel companies, both Vermont and Massachusetts have considered such legislation. But to date, no legislation has been enacted. The Massachusetts bill is still in committee with their legislative session ending at the end of this month. The council could urge state elected officials to enact legislation by sending a copy of the resolution and the cover letter to the state delegation upon approval of the resolution. So that wraps up my very high-level overview of the policy choices before you today. The resolution is in front of you for your consideration, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
I've got Greg and Mike in the queue. I just wanted to thank you for the thorough look at all of this. And would you mind telling people, and I read it in the material, about why of the funds that we have control of, we have not been investing in fossil fuels?
Right. For a couple of reasons. The first is when we look at corporate bonds and look at fossil fuel companies, the yields compared to other bonds are about the same or slightly less than other choices we have. And then the secondary reason is, as events have unfolded over the past few years with oil spills and uncertainty, staff has chosen to stay away from those investment choices.
And I guess the other thing that I would just add to the conversation is that this kind of support for the direction that the governor's been headed, the direction that the treasurer's been headed, the direction that the legislature has been headed can help them lift that boat that they've been working towards. So that's just why I think it's a very good idea for us to pass a resolution. In fact, it's probably not going to change much of their practices unless they really listen to us and I think Portland and others who've been piping in and saying, look at our PERS investment, look at our other investments as a state, and that us lending our voice to that may help move those issues along further. So I think we have an important role to play here. So with that, I will turn to Greg and then Mike.
Thanks, Mayor. Can you go a little bit further in the definition of the parameters of what we mean as fossil fuel companies? Are we talking strictly about, companies who engage in oil exploration, coal mining? Are we talking about, say, the collateral companies like, freight companies, the class 1 railroads that transport fossil fuels? What's the exact parameter in terms of that?
The list that I referred to is that there's a carbon tracker list that was part of the materials as connected. There was a link to the Mayor's Innovation Project page. And that list is the top 200 companies. There's oil, there's coal, there's gas. And so that's a list that's been compiled of all of those companies that have that have been shown to have the greatest impact on the environment. So when we talk about the companies we would avoid, we would tie back to that list.
Okay. So we would not necessarily be talking about companies that provide, services to those oil, gas, coal companies. So, for instance, UP or BNSF moving freight.
Correct. Those companies are not on the list at this time.
Hey, Mike?
If this strategy were to succeed nationwide, it would have very little effect. If it were to succeed worldwide, the only thing that we would accomplish is to make the price of gasoline and other necessary fuels catastrophically expensive. Not to mention the fact that the places and the companies doing the very most and investing the very most in the development of alternative and new fuels and alternative energy sources are these. So we will put their effort back years. That seems silly to me. However, we're not actually doing anything today. This is not a direct action of any kind. This is simply a feel-good statement of some people's belief systems. And from my perspective, we have actual work and actual valuable things that we should be doing, and I don't think we should be wasting our time doing this.
Chris?
Thank you. I appreciate the work you've done, Twyla, and your staff and everyone else, and working to try to find a very deliberate and timely and careful way of approaching this issue. Whenever I want to try to deal with an issue, I want to do it in a way that doesn't create 3 other issues in doing it. And so part of the challenge here was that you have a desirable outcome you want to achieve, and you don't want to put, as you say, the risk or the timeliness to it for us. And so I think what you've got here is something that I can be supportive of, because while it is a resolution, it does really have more in terms of what it says and what it actually does. It nevertheless makes the request that we, in a timely fashion, begin to divest ourselves from this fossil fuel investment. Not all kinds of energy production, but fossil fuel energy production. And I think giving them a 5-year timeline in which to make the effort to do that is what was, for me, the important one. I don't think we could have immediately done it without creating risk. And that was a great concern to me. Coming back with a proposal that says we'd like to see this happen gradually over time so that we don't put any of the other mechanisms at risk, I think is reasonable. So I'm happy to support this. I think it's fine.
Alan?
Great. Thank you for the thorough investigation of all this. And, it read well. It's showed good homework. Policy seems very reasonable to me. People thought that divestment wouldn't have any impact on ending apartheid. Well, in fact, that wasn't the case. In fact, it was a big part of ending that awful regime and that awful policy. And the same can happen here. Divestment is a proven strategy to change the way things work. The impact here is theoretically negative, but the reality is statistically it's irrelevant in terms of returns. And I believe over time, actually, it'll be positive for our partners who invest in our monies and our retirement. And because we can't hold stock, we can't have any directed divestment, so our actions are more indirect, and so we're limited to encouraging those that have our investments and make investments on our behalf for these different areas to change their policies. So as the maker of the original motion, I am totally in favor of this policy and encourage the councilors to support the policy.
Claire?
Thank you. Well, thank you, Mayor Piercy, for bringing this issue forward to council and staff for the research and presentation. I do think that we should codify our current practices in policy. I think it's worth doing. I think it's important to lead by example, and I note there are some dozen universities, even though our university has chosen not to take this up, there are some dozen universities that have chosen this kind of action, as well as some cities. I don't have the exact figures, but there are other folks across the country taking this kind of position. So while I agree it might be mostly symbolic at this point in terms of our ability to influence a real reduction in the burning of fossil fuels, I think it's very important to demonstrate our commitment to that goal. And so I will fully support this resolution.
And I just want to add to the conversation that when listening to investors who work in this speak, they really actually do feel that there are some very important investment decisions that are being made in this that will affect how we behave as a nation. And they also, the carbon tracker list, what you find is that when they feel the pressure of more limited resources being available and the divestment, it causes some of these very corporations to invest more in alternative energies, which is the direction that we need to go. So I think it really does have an on-the-ground effect about how we move into the future. Mike?
Thank you, Mayor. When we first brought this subject up, I asked if we could do some research on how much money the city spends, including the airport, on fossil fuels for our fleet, for the airport, for all the places where the city purchases fossil fuels. Do you have a number for that?
I don't actually.
You have a rough guess? Anything in the broadest possible range? Is it in the millions a year?
I actually don't have that
It's a big chunk of money, though, right?
I'm sure.
Yeah. Okay. So we have a concrete action we can take. If we really believe what we're saying, we can stop buying them. But we're just saying we're going to do something without actual action and not do anything real. To me, that's not actually being successful at following our beliefs, but that's just me. Well, as I mentioned, I thought that, well, I appreciate your suggestion, Alan, but those aren't my beliefs. Those are other people's. What I was saying is that perhaps they ought to be consistent in their beliefs.
Okay. I move to adopt Resolution 5109 in support of fossil fuel divestment.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor, please indicate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. In opposition, 2 passes. Thank you all very much. Next item on our agenda today is our auditor.
It's all right. I'm going to get you a black hat for Christmas.
You guys had them. Mark, welcome.
You got a clearer room, Mark.
Yeah.
What'd you say?
First time that's happened.
No kidding. I doubt it.
Welcome to you all. Get started.
I'd be more than happy to, Mayor. This is the annual presentation to council from the Civilian Review Board and the police auditor with our annual reports. I'd like to introduce the chair of the Civilian Review Board, Stephen McIntyre, and the vice chair, Bernadette Conover, and we'll turn over the microphone to Mr. McIntyre.
All right. Good afternoon, Mayor and councilors. Get this a little closer. I might have to have some help today. I just learned this year my first experience with allergies, and it's really been just hammered on me today. Hopefully I can get through this. The board is made up of a diverse group of people with different backgrounds and specialties. The board strives to ensure the public and its members are heard and opinions are valued. The board sees themselves as an independent body that is transparent in its work and is committed to honoring its obligation of ensuring public confidence in the complaint process. The CRB, we met 9 times in 2013, including a joint meeting with the Police Commission, and we reviewed 10 cases. The CRB, we previously submitted a detailed written report, and I do not intend to review each case here. Instead, I'd like to focus on how the City Council can help us maintain community representation and credibility as a board, and then finish with some comments regarding policies and training. Last month was our final meeting with Dr. Sanel Fontes. While each member on the board has unique skills and perspectives which aids in the discussions, Dr. Fontes was able to bring not only a unique perspective as a person of color within our community, but he also provided unique insights as a person raised in another country. Dr. Fontes' unique cultural experiences and his experience as a minority within this community was extremely beneficial and greatly appreciated, as there are just some perspectives that must be lived for one to fully understand. Thus, the board believes it is important to have a minority member on the board to ensure inclusive representation, as well as insightful input from a unique perspective that will most certainly bring value to the board, to the process, and to this community. Many of us on the board made efforts to recruit minority candidates for the last cycle. We were not successful. Accordingly, we really would ask the council to help us with recruiting for the next cycle. We think it's really that important. The CRB has a representative on the Eugene Police Commission, and that representative can and has referred policy issues identified during our review process and discussions. Some of those policies that we identified during this cycle were protection from self-inflicted injuries, use of facilities, arrest for misdemeanors without observation, and de-escalation techniques. And there was an attachment to the report of some of the responses from EPD. And then we also participated in a number of trainings, officer-involved shootings, Blue Team, that's use of force reporting database system, and ethics training. Oh, and also communicable diseases and environmental health. And I don't want to say that 5 times fast. The board appreciates the council's commitment to the oversight process and believes that the board's work has led to positive changes within EPD that ultimately benefits this community. Specifically, the board has observed more complaints that are internally initiated by employees of EPD, and the number of serious complaints appear to be declining. In addition, the board continues to observe immediate adjustments to current department practices through command directives and other forms of communications, as opposed to delaying changes until the policy manual can be updated. As you know, that can take a while, sometimes like up to a year to change the policy manual. On behalf of the CRB, Ms. Conover and I would like to thank you for the opportunity to serve in this capacity and for allowing to make the presentation today. Ms. Conover, do you have anything to share?
I think the only thing I would add is the Chief's office has been very good about when we have a case before us of making changes on his own, so it doesn't have to go through the Police Commission policy review process. I mean, it still goes through that, but to implement changes to get it done quicker. The one that, this is actually the second year it's been on here, the protection from self-inflicted injuries. It continues to be a concern, I think, for the CRB of people that are in police custody that harm themselves, how that can be taken care of, how the officers can stay safe and also keep their custody safe. And with regards to the makeup of our board, I would also stress that it is very important for us to have the diversity on our board so we can continue to have credibility. I think if there's anything that people will say about us that makes us less credible is that we don't have the voice of a minority on our board, and it's challenging, and as much as we can try to represent their point of view, we haven't lived their life, and so we try to be cognizant of that and understand that, but there are times where no matter how we try to think like them, we just can't. So if anything that can be done to assist us in bringing forward that perspective would be helpful. Oh, and I think it's probably well known, but the officer involved with the shooting out at Churchill has recently received a national award, and those aren't the things that we get to see in our work, but it's the things we like to see in the paper. And we continue to have a good relationship, I think, with the auditor. It's not always that we agree with everything he says and does, but we are able to have good, frank discussions about what his office does and what we are supposed to do. Thank you.
So my question of you is, do you think the CRB is functioning as intended?
Well, I can say that easily, as I do believe that it is. I think that we have very meaningful discussions. I think that we have seen changes from those discussions. We've seen police practices evolve. And I think we're willing, can be pretty debate. We have a pretty decent, robust discussions and a fair amount of debate. So I think, and that's how it's meant to be. So I say yes.
I would say that it is as well. The people that, fill out the surveys, that go through the process, they seem to maybe not agree with the final decision, but they seem to at least appreciate the process and given the opportunity. There's still work to be done on how we make sure people feel that they can engage in the process, that they don't feel like the auditor's office is still just an arm of the police department. We have a new representative on the Human Rights Commission, so I think we're continuing to look at, is there a way that we can come up with some way to bring in people that might not feel that they can make complaints. I know the complaint numbers continue to go up, so there's certainly a lot of people that think they can make complaints. More of them seem to be of the service complaint area as opposed to
Criminal complaints.
correct, or that the officers have violated any constitutional rights, and so that's very hopeful for us. The people that have come to watch us, because if someone writes a letter to the auditor and asks for us to review it, we try to do that. I think each year we've had at least one complaint. Person who's complained to the auditor's office ask us to review it, and so we try to do that whenever possible. But we don't have that many people come to us and say, we want you to review what the auditor did or what the police department did.
So I have a couple suggestions. You probably work with our human resources folks, but if you don't, my suggestion is that you work with them and try to find out if they can help you identify what barriers there are to getting minority folks to serve on the CRB. So that's one suggestion. My other suggestion is that as well as minorities, that you look at class issues for representation on the CRB, because there's a difference about how people view life from different stations in the community. So
we actually tried to word it originally as persons of diversity, but it didn't really ring quite correctly.
I just think you can have both. You can kind of look from both of those windows. Is what I'm suggesting.
Absolutely. I mean, we are fortunate that one of our newer members, not the one just appointed, but Chris Wigg, is a young person.
Right.
So it's helpful to have his perspective rather than
Right.
us.
Are you saying something?
We know about that. Okay, others? Comments? Greg?
You know, I get a lot of anecdotal reports from people in the community about police behavior complaints and connectivity with the system. I think the biggest problem that you face in terms of recruitment is actually twofold. One is, the profile of the Civilian Review Board being as prominent throughout the community as it probably should be, and I think that's an issue. And the other issue is a trust factor. A lot of people that I've engaged or talked to over the years that will come to me with various complaints about police conduct or engagement with the city feel that they don't have the connectivity in terms of trust with some of the city staff to feel comfortable in expressing complaints or expressing issues that they have. So it's one of the things I've talked with the city manager about, and I've also talked to Mark a little bit about that. We're going to kind of continue that conversation. But as talking with various leaders in both the African American community, the Latino community, and some of the other communities, those are the two issues that have rung most prominent in terms of the feedback that I've received. And I'm more than willing to help you out with that. So, I think there's some candidates out there that could be involved in that. And when we talk about differences in class and differences in age, Mayor, I know Chris, but, Chris's experience is going to be different than my son's experience.
Agreed. Absolutely. Thank you.
And both of my boys have had some interactions with the police, or should I say the folks over at the University of Oregon, that was not too pleasant. So,
Thank you for that. Claire?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you both for being here to present to us, and thank you very much for your dedication and commitment to the Civilian Review Board. It's a very important oversight body, and the seriousness with which you and the other members of the board take the charge that you have to do your work is apparent in the reports that you provide to us, and I think the growing confidence that the public has in the oversight body. So I also appreciate the independent thinking that your board shows in being willing to challenge the police auditor or disagree and come up with a different conclusion. And then I also really want to thank you for recognizing the importance of having minority representation on the board. And I appreciate Councilor Evans' willingness to try to help bring some recruits. I think it could be a really important opportunity to build trust if we can find someone who's willing to make the leap of faith to actually join the board and participate and start to bridge some of those relationships. So those are the things I wanted to say. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Alan?
Yeah, thank you for the report. It's very thorough and well done. CRB seems to be working well, and I thank you for that. It's a very important oversight body, as Councilor Surratt said, and it's a very important function, and it helps maintain our confidence in EPD. And I very much appreciate your independence in looking at these issues, because that's one of the hallmarks of the system that we've set up, that it needs to be independent, and that's very important. And I agree that we need to do a better job of recruiting people of color or minorities. I think the mayor's suggestion is a good one, and I'll think about that some more and help with the recruitment next time, as I did on this last one, but we weren't very successful. The only other comment I have is that in neither of these two reports does it actually list the members of the CRB. And I just went through it again. Maybe I missed it, but I don't see their names in here. And that was the one edit that I would suggest.
Apologies, I thought it was in their report, but we might have missed a page.
I think it should probably be in both, but
yeah.
Okay, Mike and then Chris.
Thank you, Mayor. I, too, want to thank you for the reports. I want to echo Claire's remarks. I thought those were said very well. I'd like to say thank you. Through your hard work, you all, including Mark, have realized and brought into regular practice and smooth operation an idea that just a few years ago was a potential solution to a real problem. And you guys have put that into practice on a regular basis and made it work. So good job. I would say that there's an idea, I had an idea just while listening that might help two issues that have been raised. One around general public knowledge of CRB and your operations and your duties. And another around recruitment would be perhaps very small, quick presentations to neighborhood association meetings over the next several months where you might one or two members of the CRB make a quick presentation and then let people know that they have the opportunity to serve and ask them to participate in recruitment at the neighborhood level. And perhaps that could yield some folks. You could target areas of town even if you thought that they were underrepresented for some reason.
We did in the past go to neighborhoods, but we found that no one came to see us.
Offer ice cream at this time of year. I think that's the key.
Food. Pizza.
Okay, Chris?
Thank you. Yeah, that food part definitely works. One of the reasons I supported the Civilian Review Board and the auditor back when they were first being proposed was the opportunity that could create for the community and for the police department in particular. And what pleases me is that both you as a committee and the auditor have, for me, fulfilled that opportunity. You've provided a way to not just catch bad guys, that was never really the point, but as you mentioned yourself, to help the culture of the police department become more effective, more thoughtful, and better in terms of how it operates within the community, and I think that's been very important. Another element is that it's very simple for somebody to say great things about themselves, and they don't enjoy an enormous amount of credibility when you say great things about yourself. But when a third person begins to say good things about you, that has credibility. And what you just sat here and said was, in our review of the police department's actions and the complaints we have and what we've gone on, we have seen improvement. We've seen things getting better. That carries enormous credibility for me because you're not part of the police department and you don't have a dog in that fight. You're not part of that body. So there is no obligation for you to say nice things about them unless you really meant it. That's extremely powerful. And that's part of the reason why you have civilian oversight is so somebody can independently say, this group is doing better and have credibility. And some of the suggestions that have been offered on this table, and I agree with all of them, because those are also ways that you can help to increase your credibility as a body. Having increased diversity so that people feel that it's truly representative of the whole community increases credibility. Getting out, and I know it's hard. I mean, I've had to do that function, but you keep slugging away at it because that also helps your credibility when you make that effort to do outreach. And I know it's hard, but it's something you have to keep after. But it's something that not only helps us as a city and helps the police department, but it also helps the overall culture of our community beyond the police department because it says we are a community that cares how it polices and how it interacts with the public. And that, going all the way back, was one of the things I hoped would happen with this effort. And I'm pleased to say I think it is happening, and that's to your credit. That's work that you have done.
The only thing I would add to that is I think George, you go first, and Betty.
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, I just want to thank you guys. This was the first year I think I didn't even go to one single meeting, and I apologize for that. I'd like to hit 2 or 3 a year at least, but involved with other things, and so, but I'm always amazed and very grateful for the dedication and the intelligence and just the willingness to slog through stuff and your analytical skills. I really appreciate that. I think you combined with the police auditor's office, it really makes the whole system work a lot better. And I think one reason I think because of your dedication, that's why there's not a lot of turnover. I mean, some of the other boards and commissions will have to interview several people, maybe 8 people for 2 openings. But you don't even, I mean, when Snell left, that was the first one in a long time, I think. And so that's part of the reason. Is you guys are too darn dedicated, I guess. And I just want to thank you. And it's very, very good, thorough report. Thank you.
Thank you.
Betty?
Thank you. I have a suggestion. You said that you went to neighborhood meetings and people didn't come. Is that correct?
Yes.
Most of the neighborhoods have a picnic about this time of year. And if you could have and frequently they have tables with different groups sitting there. And I think that would be a good place if you could have a table set up at the picnic with a sign telling who you are and just talk to people as they feel like approaching you. And you won't even have to bring the ice cream. Usually somebody
Get ice cream.
That's good.
It'll already be there.
And I wonder how you are dealing with minority opinions. Are they treated with, do you accept minority opinions from members of your group? And how about controversy?
You know, we're pretty almost family-like. The when we sit around, we don't use Robert's Rules of Orders. We just kind of talk a lot. And I don't know of an instance where anybody has felt that they couldn't say something. There are times where we have to pause to make sure that everybody gets to say something, but we don't have any really quiet people on our board. So we don't feel like they real need to pull anybody out to say what's on their mind. And I mean, yeah, we certainly have times where people are critical because of our backgrounds and experiences. We each find something different in the report that is sometimes a sticking point for us, for good or for bad. And so, I mean, and that's the beauty of having so many eyes looking at these things, is that we can each see something different. And the officers that do the internal investigations, they're very good about when we say we think this would be a better way for you to have questioned, even though it might not be the whole board might say, well, I think how they did it was fine. But the officers are very good about listening to it and saying, I could see why that would be a better way to ask those questions. So I don't think we have any problems with people not feeling like they can say something that might be different than the first 4 or 5 people have already voiced.
That's good. My impression is that police officers are more satisfied than they thought they would be with the whole process, which is something that takes time, I assume. I have another question. This isn't within your purview really, but do you think that it would be good if we had a similar board for other departments? Not one for each department, but I've felt for a long time that there needs to be a good place for people who feel they've been mistreated by the city, not necessarily by the police, to bring their concerns.
I think the uniqueness of the Civilian Review Board is because we're talking about people's constitutional rights, and I think that's why it's so important to have review of the police. I mean, the permit process is probably a place that I know that lots of people complain about, but it is what it is, and I'm not sure that their constitutional rights are at issue there, and so I wouldn't see that it would necessarily be helpful. And that's just an instance. I mean, I could come up with all sorts of different departments, that the library, every department has its complaints, but I don't think a review process would work necessarily in some of those other places because of the uniqueness of the police department, the policies and procedures, the constitutional rights. My personal opinion.
I agree it's different, but I think sometimes there are people feel their rights are being violated other places too, and that's a matter for another discussion, but thank you.
I was just going to say that I think that you guys, if you can find the time and the desire, op-eds and letters to the editor are always helpful in talking to the public about the work that you do. And my experience is you have to say it a number of times. So just a suggestion if anybody wants to take that up. And please, I just want to say publicly on behalf of all of us, I want to thank Dr. Fontes for serving for such a long time, and as you pointed out, having such an important role in the process. So I think I speak for all of us in expressing our appreciation for that, because I know he had a lot of other things on his plate all the time, including trips back to Haiti and all of that stuff. So I especially appreciate the effort. I appreciate all of you, but I just wanted to pull that out since I know he's leaving or has left the CRB. So I want to thank him. And Chief, they brought up about the officer. It's got the national recognition. Would you like to come up here for a minute and just say something here? Because I think that's an important thing.
You're asking about the national recognition?
Yeah.
There's a National School Resource Officers Association, and last week, Officer Aaron Johns received the Officer of the Year award for his bravery and protecting the students and staff at the school.
Churchill, right?
That's right.
Well, I think I'll just take this opportunity, since we haven't done it in other places, to say how proud we are of I put his own life in jeopardy to protect the faculty and students of Churchill, and we're glad that he's received this honor for his high level of professionalism on the part of our community. So please, hope he sees this, but you can please let him know that we are very, very proud.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll do that.
Of him for our community. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for coming, and we appreciate the report, and we know we'll hear from you and about how things are going, and if there's things that happen that you need our help, don't hesitate to let us know.
Whoever those other people are on the CRB.
Oh, you want to give the names of the rest of your CRB members?
Not off the top of your head.
There's how
Eric
many?
Van Houten, Deb Velour, Chris Wigg, Steve, me, George Rohde, and
One other.
Maury will be joining us.
Maury Denner.
Yes.
He's the newest.
Okay.
Oh, thank you. I think we just...
Good job.
Yeah.
If we forgot anybody, we're really, really sorry.
All right. Thank you very much.
You're ready.
Yes.
One other thing, shouldn't we recognize Officer Hill during ceremonial matters at maybe the next full council meeting? I think
great
that would
idea.
be
That's a great
appropriate.
idea. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's do it. Yeah.
Okay.
Technically, I was supposed to give the report on the
Is that what's up on the
auditor.
screen there?
Yes.
Oh,
We're not done yet.
we're not done yet. Not just technically.
And Leah's here, so we have to kind of...
Yeah, if it came all the way down, we may
Leah,
as well have the
picture,
show, right?
You did it in 3 minutes?
And I'll just... I'll be
20 minutes.
brief, and we may not have to go through the slideshow.
Go for the whole thing. You got time.
Before we hit that, though, I wanted to... I know, there's a lot of issues in the community, and I can just say that on a per capita basis, we probably get as many or more complaints than any place in the nation. So I think there is a degree of confidence. I appreciate concerns of communities of color about trusting institutional entities based on what their reality is. It's difficult for us to help people who don't try to get our help, and we'll do the best that we can. I think, thankfully, with the growth of the in-car videos and the body cams that officers have now, the stories are easier to tell and understand. And so we are committed to doing that this year. We've faced an awful lot of challenges. I think the biggest challenge that we have right now is being able to gather and analyze the demographic information on the number of police contacts. I don't have that capacity myself. They make about 10,000 arrests a year. That's fairly easy because DOJ captures that data. But on traffic stops and citations and things like that, I think that council should give careful consideration to working with the police department in capturing that data, because I think it is very important to our community to better understand our community. I think there's been some significant cultural shifts in policing in Eugene. When I came here in 2009, I was concerned about the number of times that officers enter people's homes for a variety of reasons. That has shifted significantly, in my view. Sometimes it's sort of like watching a plant grow. You don't see it on a day-to-day basis grow, but I think when you look back over 5 years, pat downs of people, particularly passengers in vehicles when cars are being towed, I think that there's been a significant cultural shift in the thinking on those issues. Pursuits, even though the numbers kind of look the same, pursuits for minor offenses has shifted to a more strategic approach rather than just racing through neighborhoods. When I first came here, I would get several complaints a year from places like Whitaker about police pursuits, and there's been a significant shift there. I think they're more polite, but still not where I'd like to see it. In use of force, Blue Team has, I think, made a significant cultural shift in how officers approach force, how sergeants and supervisors approach force. A couple examples, unless a few sergeants have been more deliberate about entering over the 4th of July weekend, there were 3 takedowns. And I'm assuming, I don't have arrest statistics, that they arrested a few people over the 4th of July weekend. Last weekend there was 1 wrestling match with a couple of aerobatics. And so I think that there's been a significant paradigm shift, at least short term, in that, because the reporting requirements have gone way up. I had someone say, who's been on the police force a while, boy, we sure can't get away with stuff that we got away with 20 years ago. And so it was encouraging to hear that. As you know, not everything's rosy. I'm still very dissatisfied with the process of how officer-involved shootings are looked at, and I still have fears of a process that may dismantle in a controversial type situation. And so I continue to work with the chief, recognizing both the state legislature and the regional restrictions to it, but it's something that really does concern me. We're blessed that it happens rarely, and we're cursed that it happens rarely from an experience standpoint. I don't normally like to mention names, and I know sometimes it makes people uncomfortable, but the hiring and presence of Captain Doerr from a very large agency that had large criminal issues, I think has been a real blessing for this city. He certainly has a command presence and an experienced presence that has been extraordinarily helpful in mentoring officers and getting them to understand the issues that are involved in policing. So, like I said, I don't normally like to do that. I'd like to, I can't express enough my appreciation for Leah Pitcher on our staff, who's just done a super job for us. Vicki Cox as well. It's her birthday today, so happy birthday, Vicki, to our millions of viewers worldwide. She just does an extraordinary job at that front counter. Most people send call or send email, so those normally that are left to approach our door are already experiencing significant issues in their lives and realities that are far different than our own realities. And so her work has just been extraordinary. And the other thing, I'm almost finished with my community engagement strategy, and I'll roll out to the board first, and I think that it'll work out very well. We're put the final touches on a bilingual language, not just brochures, but in terms of how people understand our process. But I hope my opinion is that so many people in this community see police officers and even sometimes city council members as action figures and not as real people in the community. And I think that that is a bridge that still needs to be improved upon. And I think that that's part and parcel with media. It's easy to get caught up in that because of the media. But I hope that we can grow closer to a model in which everybody sees each other as part of the communities. And whether you live here or not, if you work here, you spend a third of your life here. And so it's important that people see everyone, each other, as human beings rather than as action figures, if you will. And we'll go to the slides real quick. Right back to it, so you'll just tell me when we click.
Yeah.
No, that's my bad. I was sitting here. We've had more complaints this year than at any other time. It's certainly a diversity of complaints. What you'll see on the next slide is there's been a significant increase in inquiries, and I think that is mostly has to do with the fact that there's more video and audio of contacts than there hasn't been in the past. We certainly would have opened more cases in terms of perhaps allegations if it weren't for the audio and video. And I can just give one example of many where an individual alleged that an officer used racial slurs towards them. This officer was astute enough years ago to buy his own body cam, which has then been replaced by one offered by EPD, and there was no validity to that complaint whatsoever. Probably 3 or 4 years ago, we probably would have opened that as an allegation, but I had the opportunity first to look at the body cam footage, and the officer was totally professional with this individual, and so those are the reasons, I think, on the inquiries. The allegations of criminal conduct, sometimes that involves a number of different things. I don't know. I don't remember. Property room's been going on for a while, so I don't know exactly. But on page 30 or 32, we made sure that we wrote a paragraph or two about each one of those so that people understand what those involve. The next one is the sources of complaints, and have you clicked over?
Yes.
And what you've seen is a significant increase in internally reported complaints, and again, I think that has to do a lot with Blue Team, and so and just again, supervisors expecting or accepting more responsibility and bringing things forward when they think that something wasn't done right or a policy was violated. The next slide is complaints by number of employees. Out of 302 employees, 395 complaints. 44% had no complaints, and of course there were a few that had a number of different complaints. And so those always are reviewed by the EPD management staff. But generally speaking, nothing really jumps out at me. I was looking at, coincidentally, although people don't like me to bring up Cincinnati sometimes, their annual report, and there was a number of people that had a significantly large number of complaints. And of course, they're identified by name, but not in Oregon. But that's a rant for another day, I suppose. And then the next one is the specific criminal misconduct allegations and disposition. Many of those are bunched together, if you will, in terms of the cases that we investigate. The next one is the sustained complaints, and I won't go into those, but they're on the annual report. The service complaints, again, many of them have to deal with performance. People are still unhappy when officers don't take a report on a non-injury accident. Some of them have to do with the driving complaints, and if I can segue back to the pursuit, I would hope by now that the community expects that when there's lights and sirens to please get out of the way, because it's really important. It's not a car thief. It's not somebody taking a bag of chips from a local grocery store. It's a very serious matter, and so I hope that the community understands that that's what our expectation is, and that people give leeway and yield to emergency vehicles. The survey complaint survey results, our complaint resolution process, generally speaking, people are very pleased with the helpfulness of our office. I'm rarely involved in intake, so that usually falls on the shoulders of Vicki in most cases, and Leah sometimes. In terms of supervisors, listen to concerns. I honestly, under question 4, I wish the 13%, although it's only 6 people, was a little bit better. I would hope that at some point in time we would get that everyone would agree that they listened to them, maybe not agreed with them, but listen to them. But I also understand that people do get upset sometimes when they get traffic tickets, and there's a lot of traffic tickets written here in this community. So again, our strategy moving forward is includes more community engagement meetings, especially with the CRB. Maybe reduce the number of actual meetings on cases and things like that, and increase the number of community-type meetings. And then finally, I think on the one page in the annual report, we talk about a sustained rate, and then it's comparatively speaking. It says 14 of the 32 complaints were sustained, about 44% of the complaints. That's the cases that come in. And I've talked about that in terms of how we compare to other agencies. I think the reason, there's a number of variables in that number, one of which is the triage of complaints in the intake process and preliminary investigations. Also, I think the hard work of internal affairs and the lack of interference in the internal affairs process from supervisors and management. I still think it's a good number. I think really in terms of allegations, it's about 31%. But I know that there may be some unfavorable articles that might come out about it when we compare other places. But when I look at other places, and I have a little chart here, I think that when you're in or around 17% and higher, I think that shows that there's an excellent work product out there. And so, but we know in government sometimes when you excel, there must be a negative reason for that. But I would say the number one factor as well in terms of triage is that we have so much more ICV than we used to have. And even though the system's broke down for the moment, it's been very helpful in terms of looking at complaints and being able to filter out ones that have no merit. So, anybody have any questions? Alan? Counselor?
On one of your slides, it has service complaints, and bears out one of the things you said, that officers are becoming more courteous. That's had a significant decrease. But the one that sticks out is the one over a little bit to the right, which is the performance, which has had a steep increase. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're getting worse. It means that people are putting in more complaints.
It's a catch basin for perhaps an officer not returning a phone call on an investigation, or for the person who has their bike stolen, they think it's the most important case at EPD, or for not investigating a non-injury car accident. So there's a lot of different things that fall into that particular category. Maybe it should be bifurcated a little bit more. But most often it's an expectation of vigilance from a person in which they've been a victim of some criminal act, and an expectation that the response is going to be far more quick and nimble than it is, given the workload of EPD. Too often they just go from radio run to radio run, unfortunately.
How does that differ from service level? Was some of those service level ones shifted over into performance? Is that a definition?
I think so. We've kind of sort of,
Changed the way you categorize?
yeah, there's been yes. We used to
That's not
call
real.
it more, but some of the folks in IA didn't like me classifying things as a service level versus a performance kind of thing. Like if I don't return a phone call, they see it more as performance. I might see it more as service level, but in any case, it gets recorded and action is taken by the supervisor, scolding an officer, if you will, to call people back when they leave messages and things like that. So.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anybody else here? So I just want to reiterate that that's an interesting thing you just talked about, because I'm guessing that the complaints are sort of whether people are satisfied with the way they were treated by the officer service complaint, right? And as opposed to whether people responded as quickly as they would like them to. Those are sort of
Kind of
differences.
both.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, both. I think for the most part they're pretty polite, and they spend a lot of time on calls. If I was management, I would wish that at times they spent less time on some of these service calls, but they seem to do spend a lot of time, sort of like a home care nurse sometimes, on these calls. They do spend, in most cases, a little bit extra time explaining things to people while other stuff is going on. But again, you can only do so much with the resources that you have, as you all know.
And I just always feel like I want to tell you that how much I appreciate the reports that come out on a regular basis, and I hope the community takes advantage of those to understand all the work that's being done. And Leah, this is a good opportunity to say thank you to you for your work. You always get a lot of praise from him, but
Thank you.
from us too. Thank you very much. Anybody else? All right. Thanks so much for the report.
You're welcome.